HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Brief History of the Female Body, an evolutionary look at how and why the female form came to be. By Dr. Deena Emera, read by Dr. Deena Emera. Author's Note: the idea for this book was conceived during a unique time in my life. While studying the evolution of pregnancy as a graduate student at Yale, I was going through the 9-month journey of my first pregnancy. As I experienced morning sickness and worried about conditions like gestational diabetes and preterm labor, I, like anyone pregnant with their first child, had 1,000 questions about the physical and emotional roller coaster I was on. But I was also becoming the biologist who could answer those questions. At many points during my research, I thought to myself, others would want to know this. I should write a book. Since those glimmers of an idea over 10 years ago, I completed my PhD in evolutionary biology, did a postdoc in genetics at the Yale School of Medicine, and am now a scientist in the Center for Reproductive Longevity and Equality at the Buck Institute. I have also been through 3 more pregnancies. I am fascinated with how and why animal bodies evolve, and I have been particularly interested in female biology, investigating the evolution of pregnancy, menstruation, and menopause. These topics excite me, both because they showcase the forces and mechanisms that have driven the evolution of animal bodies, and because they deepen my knowledge of how my own body works the way it does. This book is for those who also want a deeper understanding of the female body. Rather than writing an encyclopedia or textbook, I have chosen a handful of topics with which I am familiar and fascinated, including pregnancy, menstruation, the mammary gland, orgasms, and menopause. We will discuss how these traits develop and function in women today, but we will mostly focus on why they exist in the first place. To understand why, we must go back in time. Most human traits were inherited by ancestors, and depending on the trait, those ancestors might have lived 15,000 years, 3 million years, 100 million years, or even longer ago. We must look to these ancestors to understand female biology today. For traits that may have puzzled or frustrated you, like menstruation and menopause, I will give you the evolutionary context to understand why we live with them. For traits that may seem more obvious, like pregnancy and the mammary gland, I will reveal many twists and surprises that make for great stories. I hope to present these topics in the most accessible and engaging way that I can. Early in my career, I had a brief stint as a high school biology teacher and became sensitive to the hurdle that biological jargon imposed on my students' understanding of basic concepts. Even as a scientist familiar with biological terminology, reading an article outside my immediate field can be excruciating. I do my best in this book to avoid esoteric language when I can, and to help explain the jargon when I can't avoid it. In the introduction, I present the language, concepts, and theoretical work that provide the foundation for understanding the rest of the book. The evolutionary logic might be challenging to grasp at first, but it is also fascinating, intuitive, and worth the read. This book focuses on females, which in biology refers to the sex that produces eggs as opposed to sperm. Even if we choose never to use those eggs or sperm, a choice only humans have because of cognitive and technological advances in our species, our bodies are built for reproduction. Therefore, to understand human biology, we must talk about sexual reproduction, the mixing of DNA from 2 parents to produce children, and biological sex, as mentioned earlier. Throughout this book, I use the terms female and woman to refer to an individual who produces eggs. But I recognize that some individuals who are equipped to make eggs do not identify as a woman or female, and some equipped to make sperm do not identify as a man or male. For these people, their biological sex is not the same as their gender, a social identity that is affected by cultural and biological factors. We are only beginning to understand how culture, experience, hormones, and genetics influence gender, a topic I touch on in Chapter 1. As I chose the words for this book, my purpose was not to gloss over or ignore gender, but only to streamline the discussion, much of which pertains to the organs and tissues used by female mammals for reproduction. Lastly, while the idea for this book was conceived during the unusual situation I mentioned earlier, it was carried to term many years later during another unusual situation, the COVID-19 pandemic. The 3 years I have spent developing, writing, and editing this book have been difficult ones for most of us in the world. The pandemic has brought illness and death, not to mention stress, disruptions to work and family life, and isolation from others. Writing this book has been a welcome escape in an isolating time, for it has reminded me of the connections we share with all life on Earth, and I'm grateful for the chance to connect with you through my writing. Introduction: The Shaping of Female Biology. I have often puzzled over the idiosyncrasies of female biology. As a teenager, I agonized about my periods, wondering why I had to endure the monthly mood swings, pain, and inconvenience. During my pregnancies, I was baffled by the many possible complications, including miscarriage, high blood pressure, diabetes, premature birth, and postpartum depression. Now in my 40s and approaching the end of my reproductive years, I am both mystified and miffed by menopause. Why must I lose my fertility and experience the notorious side effects of menopause, while my husband gracefully enters the second half of his life with much less fanfare? As an evolutionary biologist who has spent years studying the evolution of female reproductive biology, I have searched for the answers to these questions that women everywhere ask about their bodies. My mission in this book is to share with you what I know, hoping to answer your questions too. The aim of this introduction is to give you the toolkit you'll need to understand my explanations in subsequent chapters. In discussing the evolution of female biology in this book, I will cover the evolutionary process that you've certainly heard about, natural selection. But to better understand the enigmas of the female body, we will explore less familiar evolutionary processes. In the version of evolution often taught in high school and portrayed in the media, we imagine a tooth and claw struggle in the jungle between predator and prey, picturing evolution as a result of a battle between animal and nature. But the truth is, many of the conflicts our ancestors faced were with each other. These evolutionary conflicts of interest, which can exist between male and female over reproduction, between siblings, and even between mother and child, have been an important driving force in the evolution of female biology. Many of us idealize the mother-child relationship, assuming it is molded by harmonious, shared interests. We are expected to give anything and everything to our children, since what is best for our children should be what is best for us. When mothers prioritize our own needs, we feel guilty and selfish. However, while the relationship between mother and child is based on evolved cooperation, perplexingly, it has also been shaped by conflicts of interest that play out in the womb, continue after birth, and even extend into adulthood. A child's evolutionary motivation is to take more from its mother than what is best for her to give. The child tries to get more, and the mother tries to hold her ground. This may sound like a scene from a modern-day living room or kitchen, but in fact, it has been going on, back and forth for millions of years. These epic evolutionary conflicts have shaped our monthly periods, our difficult pregnancies, our behaviors with our children, and perhaps even our experience of menopause. Our ancestors also experienced sexual conflict over whether to have sex and how frequently to do it. Many of our female primate relatives regularly endure rape and sexual intimidation, and in some species, this aggressive male behavior extends to the killing of a female's babies fathered by other males in order to gain sexual access to her. In humans, though, there was a détente between males and females, and coercive male behavior is more of the exception than the rule. So the female story isn't only about conflict. Beyond just an easing of tensions between male and female, the evolution of greater social cooperation in the human lineage has left lasting marks on our anatomy, physiology, and behavior. Early humans evolved a more cooperative family life, with fathers and extended family pitching in to feed and raise children. Not only does this cooperative behavior remain with us today, but it may have changed other aspects of our biology, like the way we age, as you'll learn when we discuss longevity and menopause. One of the key messages I hope you take from this book is that many features of our biology today can be explained by the evolution of family relationships, with all their cooperation and conflict. The high school version of evolution. Before diving into female biology, we need to get a handle on some basics. Evolutionary conflict and cooperation both involve Darwin's idea of natural selection, so natural selection is the place we need to start. For a few years after college, I was a 10th grade biology teacher and tried to use the most intuitive and compelling examples to illustrate how adaptation by natural selection works. Some of my go-tos were the different beak shapes of Galapagos finches, color changes in peppered moths during the Industrial Revolution, and the increase in lactose tolerance in humans after the domestication of dairy animals. Let's use the classic example of peppered moths as a refresher. Moths in Manchester and other parts of England in the early 1800s had light wings with small dark splotches. This color combination is good camouflage against light-colored tree trunks, making it difficult for birds to prey on moths that rest on these trees during the day. But as the Industrial Revolution progressed in the 19th century, so much pollution was released from factories that trees became blackened with soot. Importantly, there was some variation in moth wing color as trees started to darken. Most moths were light, but a few were dark, and offspring resembled the color of their parents. This kind of inherited variation is necessary for adaptation by natural selection. And now we know it exists in part because mutations are always popping up in our DNA. I can hear my fresh 21-year-old self now, my zealous teacher voice, emphasizing the randomness of these mutations. Evolution is not intentional, I would tell my students. Mutations cannot anticipate what will work, but the ones that happen to improve reproductive success increase in frequency. In this case, the camouflaged darker moths fared better than the light ones in the new, polluted environment. They weren't eaten by birds, and therefore had more babies, passing their dark version of the wing color gene to the next generation. Between about 1850 and 1900, dark moths almost completely replaced light ones. As I taught my students about peppered moths, I stressed the importance of environmental challenges in the process of natural selection. Moths faced an obvious obstacle in their environment: their bird predators. While this case focuses on predation as the selective environmental factor, there are plenty of others, including resource availability. Darwin's well-known finches ate different foods on the various Galapagos Islands. In a well-studied case from the 1970s, the type of food changed on one of the islands because of a drought. The finches with larger beaks were better able to handle the large, hard seeds, and beak size increased on the island over time. A more comprehensive view of evolution. While this stripped-down version of evolution was what I could cover in a 2-week high school unit on the subject, the reality is that the evolution of most biological traits is rarely as straightforward as the case of peppered moth wings. The truth is much more interesting. Not every body part or behavior is an obvious adaptation produced by natural selection. First, some traits are not adaptations at all. Traits can emerge simply as byproducts of others, the most obvious example of which is the belly button. The belly button has no function, and it didn't evolve as an adaptation for any specific function. It is simply a byproduct of the placenta and umbilical cord evolving in placental mammals as an alternative way to nourish developing babies. Another example is nipples in males. In a controversial and influential paper in 1979, Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin called these biological byproducts spandrels, after the architectural term for the leftover triangular spaces in structures built with arches. Architectural spandrels weren't designed to fulfill a specific function. They're simply features that arise because of the way structures with arches are built. As Gould and Lewontin asserted, many biological traits are like spandrels, arising as non-adaptive byproducts of the evolution of other traits that are adaptive. In a later chapter, I will argue that menstruation in our species is a byproduct trait, albeit with a fascinating backstory. Gould and his colleagues stressed that originating as a spandrel does not prevent a trait from becoming useful later. Like architectural spandrels, which are often beautifully decorated to enhance the aesthetics of structures, biological spandrels can become useful and contribute to an organism's success, even if it didn't emerge for that or any functional purpose. Gould used the example of the human brain, arguing that when the large, complex brain evolved for its main function, perhaps consciousness, although he stressed that we do not really know, thousands of spandrels emerged, such as the capacities for language, reading, writing, art, commerce, and religion. Gould saw many aspects of human mental uniqueness, not as adaptations, but simply as byproducts of a complex brain. And he used this example to support his more general and still contentious claim that spandrels are a frequent and important source of evolutionary innovation. In Chapter 9, I'll raise the possibility that human menopause emerged as a byproduct of longer lifespans in humans, after which the useful behavior of caring for grandchildren evolved in post-menopausal women. Another wrinkle in a neat and tidy view of evolution is that traits can evolve for one purpose and then change function over time. Sometimes the new function obscures the reason the trait emerged in the first place. A great example is bird feathers. Although feathers are required for flight in birds, most now agree that they did not evolve as an adaptation for flight. In fact, from what we know about the first feathers in the fossil record, from dinosaurs, not birds, They could not have supported flight. They may have served as insulation, as courtship signals, or as both. We may never know. Only later, after a series of changes in feather development, could feathers have been used for flight. In later chapters, I'll discuss breasts and orgasms as traits that likely changed functions over evolutionary time, making it difficult to untangle how and why they evolved in the first place. Traits can also be adaptive in one environment, but neutral or even maladaptive in another. When I taught my high school students about peppered moths, I asked them what would happen if we experimentally manipulated the color of those tree trunks. Dark moths are adapted for dark trees, but if we scrubbed those trees clean of soot, dark moths would be at a disadvantage again. In fact, in the real world, the number of dark moths has dropped in regions that have adopted cleaner manufacturing practices, to which they are now mismatched. Mismatch is particularly relevant for human evolution. Our bodies evolved under a certain set of conditions, but recent cultural changes have happened so quickly that our biology hasn't had a chance to catch up. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors did not have the luxury of going to the supermarket or super-duper burger when they needed to eat. Sometimes food was abundant, sometimes it was scarce. The way the human body metabolizes and stores energy evolved under these feast or famine conditions. Our taste for fatty foods and the way we store extra energy as fat may have been adaptations for our ancestors, but today they're liabilities, increasing our risk of obesity and cardiovascular disease. Such mismatches between our evolved biology and modern environments will be mentioned in many of the chapters to follow. These examples show how the evolution of female biology is more nuanced and complex than the simple example of peppered moth wings. But to appreciate the richness of evolutionary phenomena that were at play in our female ancestors, including the cooperation and conflict I mentioned earlier, we need to return to our high school version of evolution. When I taught my 10th graders about adaptation by natural selection, we discussed predators, food scarcity, and extreme climate or altitude as environmental factors that could drive evolutionary change. But these factors ignore a critical component of our environment, the other individuals with whom we interact. Individuals in social species like ours live in complex groups and must interact with other group members. Even the most solitary mammals interact with other individuals for reproduction and with their own offspring when they are first born. With these interactions between individuals comes the potential for evolutionary change, because every individual brings their own set of interests to the interaction. Interactions related to reproduction, the choice of with whom, when, and how frequently, are shaped by sexual selection, a topic that may have been mentioned in your high school text after peppered moths. Sexual selection was Darwin's solution to extravagant traits, like the peacock's tail, which are not easily explained as adaptations for survival. When you imagine a hungry tiger chasing the peacock, with such a conspicuous and cumbersome adornment, it's hard to appreciate how the tail makes it more fit to its environment. But if the tail attracts peahens, enabling that peacock to make more babies than the other guy, it may be worth all the trouble of making and living with it. As I'll cover in Chapter 5, sexual selection was a powerful force in our evolutionary past, driving the evolution of human body ornaments that include permanent breasts and a large penis, at the same time shaping our perceptions of attractiveness. In addition to interactions over reproduction, Many, if not most, of our interactions are with family. In social species, the groups in which we live consist of family members. Parents, children, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, grandchildren. As anyone who has lived with family knows, family life certainly poses challenges. As one who spends her days dealing with 4 young children and a harried husband, I can't help but be fascinated by the ways that ancient negotiations and disputes among family members have influenced our biology. As you'll see, the evolution of family relationships in our mammalian, primate, and human ancestors has left lasting traces on our behavior, physiology, reproduction, and aging. Cooperation is all in the family. The discovery of evolutionary transactions between family members started with honeybees. Honeybees have an unusual social contract. Honeybee colonies contain tens of thousands of bees, but only one female, the queen, makes babies, and she is the only one fed royal jelly from the moment she hatches. All the other females in the colony are fed a more diverse diet that leaves them sterile. When the queen is ready, she flies out to find males from other colonies with which to mate. Males don't do much in the colony other than mate with foreign queens. I would say they have a pretty good deal, except for the fact that they die in the act of mating. What do all the other females in the colony do if they're not reproducing? Everything else. When they are young, they keep the hive clean, make royal jelly, and feed all the larvae. When they get older, they act as construction workers, maintaining and expanding the hive when necessary. They become foragers, finding nectar and bringing it back to the hive. As part of the foraging, they become dancers, performing waggle, tremble, and round dances to communicate information about where the food is to other foragers. Worker females also defend the colony, which is why the female, not the male, is equipped with a stinger. The life of a female worker bee is exhausting. While Darwin was establishing his ideas on natural selection, he puzzled over this social agreement between honeybees, which is known as eusociality. Why would the hard-working female bees leave the job of reproduction to the queen? What's in it for them? Adaptation by natural selection predicts that traits that reduce reproductive success will disappear over time, like the light-colored moth wings during the Industrial Revolution. Sterility is complete reproductive failure. Even if you survive longer than anyone, you can't pass on the genes for your longevity to the next generation. So how are sterility and helping behavior maintained in worker bees? Darwin had an answer to this, albeit a somewhat vague one. In his thinking about the puzzle of the sterile worker bee, the concept of kin selection was born. He argued in On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection that it is possible for traits to evolve that harm you but benefit others if you are all of the same stock or family. He hypothesized that natural selection operates on the family as well as the individual. Kin selection is the foundation for many explanations of social behavior in animals and humans, including the most fundamental of behaviors, parenting. So let me spend a few moments fleshing out the concept and its history. While heredity is a necessary part of natural selection, the importance of genes was not appreciated until Gregor Mendel's now famous experiments on pea plants were recognized in the late 1800s. Scientists Ronald Fisher and J.B.S. Haldane mathematically merged Mendel's genetics with Darwin's selection And in fact, Haldane used the English peppered moths to develop mathematical models of natural.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?